everyone to Click Moments, where the right information at the right time is a portal from where you are to where you want to be. And I'm your host, Beth Orr. And today we have a guest. We have Virginia Shepley. And she is an artist out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. However, I don't know her from Winston-Salem. I actually know her from Asheville and a community of artists that are in a gallery named Art Play. And we were at an artist retreat. And I'm going to share about how I discovered you, but I just want to welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So I met Virginia at an artist retreat at Lake Centilla, and I didn't know you before. And one of the things that really struck me about you, which is why I wanted to reach out with you, is I believe that every artist has a story about how becoming an artist kind of started to percolate in them. They had this moment of, or identification, or even as a child, there's something that happened that had somebody kind of lean in. And you were an instrumental part of me calling myself an artist because of what happened when you were doing an offering that you had. So Virginia did an offering, and she was teaching us about her process and how she approaches the art that she does. And whereas normally in these retreats, I'm like, I feel like an outsider, but yet I feel welcome, but I don't necessarily feel like an artist. It was the first time where I had a medium and I had a project that I was working on that it just like surged through me. And I was like, oh my gosh, and I'm grabbing paper and I'm into the exercise and I'm so not in competition mode or seeing what anybody else does. I just want to create what's coming through me. And that was the first time during your exercise that I said, I'm an artist. And I got super excited. And although other people identified and saw that in me, I didn't see it in myself, which is a huge shift. So I just want to thank you, because if you hadn't taken the risk to share your gifts with other people, then I wouldn't have had that experience. And I don't know how that would have come through me, right? So I just want to thank you for that. How about for you? I'm interested in the first time that you experienced that moment where you said, oh, something about art is speaking through me or to me, or I'm an artist. Do you remember that moment?
Well, I was always creative as a child. You know, my mother was very whimsical and she was a poet. And so she really always encouraged sort of, creativity in any form. So it was always something that felt accessible to me. But I really had that moment, the moment that you're talking about, more when I was in my 30s and I was doing a lot of therapeutic work to heal some personal trauma, some traumatic experiences. And what happened was I just started working and I felt like I just felt like it was the right thing to be doing. And I felt like information that I needed at that time came through my artwork in sort of inexplicable ways. And I just realized that something bigger than me comes through that medium for me and has information and lessons for me. So as soon as I started seeing that, then I really felt like this is important to me, very important to me. And then recently I feel like now I realize that it's important to everyone. That creativity is really important to everyone.
Right. Yeah. So what you're describing, it kind of reminded me of oftentimes when we're healing parts of ourselves, there's something that's right below the surface that's pre-verbal and we can't quite put words to it. But I feel like sometimes when we're experiencing art gets us feeling things before we can know what we're thinking about it, right? And so what it feels like you're describing is that kind of pre-verbal recognition that possibly the person viewing it is also having an experience, regardless of what your intention is or your experience is in creating it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like, originally it was more sort of lessons for me, but I feel like now my work is more intentional. It's more like I'm choosing to make work that creates a good feeling. So my intention is really more about, this or that is bothering me, this or that is on my mind. And then I think to myself, well, what would be the antidote of that? Or what feeling would be the antidote for how I'm feeling now? Like what am I after? In the ideal world, if everything resolved itself exactly perfectly, how would I feel? And that I feel like people respond a lot to that in my work because they recognize something of it. It just makes me feel like we're all thirsty for balance and meaning in our lives, Yeah.
It feels like the art has evolved, your art has evolved as you've evolved, right? Yeah. So at first it was something was coming through you and it was being healed, but now it's like you're utilizing, like you said, intentionally utilizing the art as a means to, I don't know if it's a means, but you can describe this as a way to feel more of what you want to feel.
Right. And to put that out in the world. I feel like we're in such a crazy time.
Yeah.
and the world needs light so bad. So I feel like that, now my work is really more intentional about just, this is something I can do.
Yeah.
I can do this.
Right.
I don't know what else I can do,
right.
but this I can do,
Yeah.
So, and I feel like everyone can do that. So part of what my offering was about was to see if I sort of couch the artwork in this idea of putting out an intention for yourself, like if other people respond to that, and maybe,
right.
That's what touched you.
Right.
Is just that opening that doorway to, I can sort of manifest visually some kind of wish for how I want myself or the world to be.
Yeah, I love that. And there is a light theme throughout much of your work, right? You know, and that comes across. And I think one of the things that I notice when people are looking at art is I feel like people are drawn to art that helps them feel the things that they want to feel more of.
Yes, I guess that's true. Yeah.
And so I think it makes sense to me that people are responsive without having words for why, that people would be responsive to ways that if this says light to you, and this says balance to you, and this says precious to you, then some piece of that energy has to be in the work that you're sharing. And it may translate to different visual images to other people, but I think the energy of what your intention is somewhere in that work, bringing up something in that individual's own, lens of who they are, right?
I also use a lot of sort of geometric forms, and in a funny way, I feel like that they are sort of ancient symbols that have been in existence throughout time, and I feel like they do something too.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they sort of keep a doorway open or I don't know what they communicate something symbolically, I feel like, across everyone. That there's something about a circle or there's something about a triangle that kind of gives all of us a similar maybe message or feeling. Interesting. I was thinking about it on the way here after you sort of told me what you were interested in. Just
Yeah.
thinking about.
That makes a lot of sense, though. Like that, it's like I've talked a lot about recently remembering, like putting ourselves back together with the infinite, right? And so to remember,
Right.
and what you're describing in an ancient is like an ancient language, and these symbols are language, right?
Right.
And so if we identify with them without understanding what they mean, it's still a shared space that's like belonging that we all get. Ooh, circle.
Yeah.
That feels like complete, right? There's something
Yeah.
that it brings up in us.
It's the one.
It's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at your work, I see, like, it's interesting because some of your pieces, it looks like you were inspired by something similar, but yet they have similar symbols, but they're yet so different, right? And then some of your work that I've seen recently is so different. Like, I'm just like, whoa, this is so not like what I'm used to seeing. So can you talk about like how these images and these ideas for what you create, like what's your process for creating and how does it come through you?
Well, I don't have any, people ask all the time, do you have formal rituals that you do before you start working? I don't really. But I feel like all the juice for me in terms of art making really comes when I'm drawing, as opposed to painting. And there's something very tactile for me about working on paper and the way that it feels, and the pencil on the paper and the erasing and so I feel like somehow through that sort of physical interaction with my surface, I feel like that's where the imagery comes from. And then I do a lot of sketching in my sketchbook. I draw a lot of pictures really fast. I don't try and render anything from the real world, but I don't know, if I have an idea I write it down. So some of my strange ideas come from there. Just if it pops up, I just put it down and see if it makes sense later for what I'm thinking about.
Does it need to make sense? Because I'm wondering, like, sometimes when I see like the titles of pieces, when somebody sees a title, there's a presumption that there's some sort of meaning that's connected to it.
Right.
And I wonder if that's true or not. If there is, like, how do you come up with that connection to the meaning or a title with a piece, given if it's something that you consider strange or out there or...
It's really it's a funny intuitive thing. Like I just let the ideas come. I don't try and change them or have a theme or whatever. I let the weird things come. But I always feel like I get information from the artwork. So I do feel like my titles come from some sort of dialogue with the piece itself. So I do feel like the titles for me are meaningful.
So when you're when you're creating something, is it like this rapid, like you're done in a day kind of thing? Or is it like, do you sit with a piece, or is it different by piece with how it comes out of you and the speed with which it comes out?
I would say almost always the drawings happen fairly quickly, like in a day.
Okay.
Because once I sort of get going, then I just love to keep going with that. Painting is different, and sometimes I'll have a piece drawn out on paper, but then I have to think about the color for a longer time.
Okay.
So the color isn't as immediate sort of response from me. In fact, I feel like I usually decide about my colors before I even pick up a paintbrush.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I usually, like, once the drawing's done, it may take me some time to figure out the colors, but and that's why in some way painting isn't as much fun for me, because all the kind of discovery is been done by the time I get there with the paintbrush.
Yeah.
You know, there's some tweaking that happens if colors aren't working or whatever, but in general, I've figured all that out before.
Is that intuitive too? Does the color come out, you know, pretty like these are going to go together and this is what this is?
Well, again, I use so much symbology for myself. So colors have all sorts of symbolic meaning for me. And so sometimes it's that makes me choose a color, or and sometimes not. But then after the fact, I'm like, oh, you know, that color really kind of embodies this for me in this painting. But I would say now that, you know, now it's a funny thing. I just assign my own meaning to shapes and colors and whatever. Yeah, I just decide what it means to me and then put it in there.
Yeah. So color, what you intend for the color to mean whenever you're creating it and what it means to you may be different than the interpretation of the color to the person that eventually ends up seeing the piece or buying the piece. Can you kind of talk to, have you watched people experience your work for the first time or a piece and have a completely different experience than what you poured into it? Or kind of on the opposite end, if you watch somebody like nail it, like with what you intended, and it's like almost like the meaning is written out onto it because it's such a transferable experience.
I feel like my experience on social media has just been amazing. I mean, when I started posting on social media, I had no expectations. I mean, I'm an old lady. I've never been on social media, so I literally only did it to kind of put my work out there. And the response that I've gotten has been so moving and just very touching to me, because people do, it's like they see what I'm trying to say. And not everybody, obviously not everybody, but I feel like people who are searching, people who are working on themselves, people who are healers, I feel like they respond.
Right.
You know, there's something about that sort of human search for a feeling of connection, or that human search for I don't know what it is that we're all searching for, you know. It is that connection with God or the universe, or
Yeah. I can see that because I keep feeling like when I watch different artists, because, you know, at the gallery I see kind of who's attracted to what different pieces, and there's different artists that are in there. And so it is interesting how people are drawn to the energy of the artist without even sometimes knowing who the artist even is. Right. That there's some sort of mutual process or mutual questions about the universe that are percolating in them, that it's almost like they're getting some sort of answer, or something in them's going, I don't know what it is, but it feels like it's answering something within me without even knowing what it is. Right. And I can see that happening. It's like, it's really a fascinating, I think, experience to not use words to have something that gives a connection between people, you know? I'm wondering about, so you were mentioning that you were in your 30s when you kind of had this like realization that art was a means for some healing for you. Were you doing something else in your life? Were you, like, for a living, were you doing something else? Or were you primarily still an artist through that discovery with the healing?
Well, I was, you know, I had a job to make money.
Yeah.
But I would have called myself an artist eventually. It took me a while to kind of just believe in myself enough to call me that. But then I realized, like, if you're consistently making art, you can call yourself an artist.
Right.
You know, it doesn't take much other than just producing stuff.
Right.
If you do that, then you're an artist.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
That's great. So as you've gone through different experiences. Like I know recently you went on a residency. You went to, you had a residency. Can you describe to me, I think of residency and I am really interested in, I've heard many artist friends of mine recently saying that they're going to go on a residency. And I'm like, is this like a sabbatical? Like, is it similar to a sabbatical? Why does somebody who's an artist go to a residency, and what is the guiding light inside that?
Well, there could be a number of different reasons why you would do a residency. For me, I just wanted a break from being a wife and mother, to just be able to focus 100% on my work and not be interrupted to make dinner or, do anything for my family, just to take care of myself and kind of just stay with whatever thread I'm working on. So that was really my intention. But, people go because they want to produce work for a show. They have a show coming up and they need that intensive time to just power it out and do all of the work. So there are different reasons people go. But for me, it was just to stop out of reality. Mm-hmm. And it was great. I had 3 weeks.
Where'd you go?
I was in Point Reyes, California.
Okay. All right. And besides giving you that kind of break that you had hoped for, did you come out of it with, there's never a need to produce something. Right. Sometimes it can just be a season of rest.
Well, it was an interesting thing. I produced a lot of work, but it was not work that was similar to what I make now. A couple of people had said to me, I think you should experiment. You should take the time, just do something completely different. So I did that. So that was kind of an interesting experience for me to come home with a bunch of work that I didn't really feel like was me or sort of represented what I do normally. But it was a very cathartic experience, and I did a lot of sort of just kind of inner searching. So I did more personal work than I might have otherwise. Okay. Because nobody was looking and it was just for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So these aren't pieces that you're going to sell. These are pieces that are just for you.
Well, oddly enough, when I did them, I thought of them as just being for myself, but I feel like few people have seen them and they like them. They're completely and totally a different look than what I make normally. So it's curious to me.
Right. Interesting.
What will happen? I don't know.
So you had, and I don't know if this is the difference that you're talking about, but when I think of your work, I think of like Interstellar. I think of like, light and stars and figures that, like, I love your piece As Above, So Below, and I think of the balance of different pieces, and it gets me thinking in that kind of expansive universal way, right? Which is also obviously like an internal experience too, when we think, of the expansive universe, also the microcosm within us. But some of the pieces that I saw on Instagram, and I'm wondering if this is from, this time, one of my friends mentioned how they had seen some of your work and it felt more grounded. It felt more like earth and like more tactile, right? So not something so elusive out here, but it felt tangible, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if that resonates with you, or how your work was different given how I describe my experience with what I expect when I look at your work, right?
It's an interesting question, because I feel like sometimes now, like often in my work, I'm working with opposites. So I'm working with black and white, or I'm working with, air and land, or, space and the real world. So I feel like now I'm trying to bring in I have all these sort of symbols, but now I'm kind of interested in bringing in more of the real world. So some of my newer pieces, there are more kind of literal references in it, like fires or waves or trees or even human beings, which I almost never paint. But lately there's a way that I feel like that symbolic world kind of needs a real world grounded sort of counterpoint for it. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah. And there's also, like, I love how, like, I get goosebumps thinking about this. I love how vibrant, that's one of the things that really caught my attention. I'm such a monochromatic person. So it's shocking to me how much your work, like the color, is what resonated with me. So in the experience that you gave us at the artist retreat, there was just like, you had like 280 pieces of paper with different colors on it. And I was like, oh my gosh. And normally, whereas I think I'd be overwhelmed by that, and it's like the antithesis of kind of who I am and lots of color, for some reason in that exercise, it really resonated with me deeply. And I think that's one of the things I love about your pieces. I always feel like that the colors, there's nothing happenstance about it. Like, it's not just like, just pick a color, or, yeah, this is good enough. Or, like, it feels like that each one of the colors, in the way that it's on the page, it feels like it has significant meaning.
Great.
It comes out. It comes out.
That's great, because it does have significant meaning for me. And oddly enough, when I first started working in art school, I worked only in black and white for years. Probably 5 or 6 years, I just worked in charcoal and ink and paper. And then little by little, like, pink started coming in, and then green started coming in, and now I just feel like it's a big color explosion that's been happening. But it really started very, very basic, and so I can't really explain that other than in some ways it just feels like something's continuing to open up.
I like that. It reminds me of, as a writer, my way of sharing what I'm experiencing is through words, right? And it reminds me of, like, when we start with people, as I'm also a therapist, and as a therapist, I, work with people on the feelings wheel and really identifying what their feelings are. And oftentimes it's like, the very center of the feelings wheel is like good, bad. It's so very clearly, black and white. It's just opposite, kinds of experiences that we say, happy, sad, and then you start to get into the nuances of a feeling. Right. And that sad is, or fear might be uncertain, or, you've got all these little nuances. And so you start to give more language to it. And what it feels like is, it feels like the black and white is kind of like that. It feels like now that you have like 300 different colors that you use, it almost feels like language inside of ourselves. I'm wondering how that, like, is you having more of a language for your own experience. I don't know if it resonates.
Yeah.
It just feels...
No, I do feel like that. Yeah, I'm very excited to teach this class because of just my own curiosity about that. Like, to say to people, make up your own language. I mean, that's really what it is. It's like, your intention is XYZ, and I'm going to cut out a square, and that's going to mean this to me. And this green something or other is going to mean that, and that's, and so I'm just curious whether it's that simple or not.
Yeah, beautiful. What class are you referencing?
I'm referencing, I'm going to be teaching at Art Play, a class on collage and intention.
Cool. When is it?
It is on March 23rd.
March 23rd?
Saturday, March 23rd.
I will be there. That sounds great. Yeah. And if people want to get a hold of you or learn more about your work, where can they get engaged with you?
Probably the best way to actually see my work is to look at my work on Instagram. And my Instagram handle is #VirginiaShepley1.
Okay.
I also have a website, www.virginiashepley.com. But it is a little bit out of date, and I'm in the process of updating it. So soon it will be current.
Great.
Yeah.
So if for the folks out there who are like how I was, and I'm curious about art, I'm interested in art, I'm drawn to it. I might have even timidly called myself maybe an artist at one point, but now I'm walking more into that. What would you say for people who weren't given the kind of messages to explore when they were younger, that are feeling an inclination to create in some way? How would you help somebody kind of approach what's happening in them as an experience?
I guess I would just recommend that they play as much as possible, play with different materials until they find something that they love. I mean, there's so many, some people love clay, some people love, pastels because they're messy and chalky, and some people like a paintbrush because it's more removed, and there are so many different ways to create that, just, I would say play and play and play and let yourself play. Don't, I put up signs in my studio all the time saying it's okay to make bad art. I think we're so intimidated that you get a piece of paper or a canvas or whatever, and it's like, oh, it has to be beautiful and perfect, but it doesn't. And sometimes its imperfection is what makes it a unique, special piece.
Right.
And it's not all finished.
Yeah, and I think I love that concept of play, because I think you can have 10 people in a room. Like, you could have all of us at a retreat in a room, and we're all going to do something completely different and reach for different tools and mediums and all of it. And there's no right way. Right?
Exactly. There's only a right way for you in this moment. Yeah.
I think there's something that's maybe even something that we don't talk about in art. Not only is it that I think that people love seeing when somebody does something that doesn't make sense to them, that you can make a living doing something that you're passionate about, like creating. Right. I think that's alluring to people, to do something non-traditional. But I also think there's something else that's kind of coming through people, and I think that permission to play and not produce anything, but just to enjoy. Right. Yeah. I feel like that comes out in a lot of people's art, is the enjoyment of just creating. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, I think that's a wonderful experience to have. It's just that was super fun, whatever it was that you did.
Yeah. And that could be enough. Right. Like, you could actually just do something that produces a tremendous amount of joy. Right. Yeah. So, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you're like, I want to share this about my work, I want to share this as about an instrumental part of who you are or what you bring to the work that you're doing?
Well, I guess I just, all I would want to say is that I'm bringing intention through my work. Like, I really believe that, I believe we all can heal ourselves. And I think that a creative act helps manifest something in the real world. And so I really feel like that art making is a very healing practice, and I would encourage anyone and everyone do it. Really.
Yeah, thank you.
Because I feel like it helps you contact something inside. It helps you express yourself just for the joy of expression, and it shines your light. It brings something of each person out into the world that wouldn't be there. So I don't know. I just think it's a powerful practice.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for your time and just sharing more of who you are and what art means to you. We really appreciate that. So
thank you.
A special thanks to Micah McKenzie for the incredible cover art for Click Moments. And until next time, peace, love, and light.
Do with these words what you will. It's time for us to be for real. You'll be stuck on the ground until you finally break the shell.